Mira Cardoso crossed the floor and locked her hand around the wrist of the man who had grabbed her sister, and she twisted it back until his fingers opened. She did not shout. She did not look for help. She told him flatly that it was the hand he signed with and that he could keep it or he could keep touching Leah, but not both. 50 people turned, 5 families stopped breathing, and the black doors at the end of the room opened, and the only man in the city whose name people refused to say out loud walked in and saw her first. If you want to see how far this story goes, take 1 second and subscribe to the channel, because what happens in the next 2 hours took 11 years to build, and it does not break the way anyone expects. Stay with me all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from tonight, because I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. The man's name was Duarte Serra, and he was not used to being touched. He was used to touching. That was the entire architecture of his life. And Mira had understood it in the 2 seconds before she moved, the way she understood most things quickly and without any pleasure in the understanding. He wrenched his arm free and stared at her. He looked at her dress first, which was black and 3 seasons old and had been washed too many times, and then at her shoes, which were borrowed and did not fit, and then finally at her face, and she watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. Staff, somebody's driver. Nobody. He decided all of it in under a heartbeat, and she knew exactly what he had decided because she had spent her whole life being sorted into that particular drawer by men exactly like him. He told her to get her hands off him. He said it loudly so the room would hear that a servant had put hands on a Sarah. Mira did not answer. That was the first thing that went wrong for him, and he did not have the intelligence to notice. She simply stepped in front of her sister, which put 22-year-old Leah Cardoso behind her shoulder and out of reach, and she folded her hands in front of her, the way she had folded them 10,000 times in her father's house, and she waited. Waiting was the only weapon she had ever been allowed to own. She had gotten very, very good with it. Leah was shaking. Mira could feel it through the half-inch of air between them, the specific tremor of a young woman who had been told all week to smile and stand straight and be grateful. Their father had spent 400 euros on Leah's dress. He had spent nothing on Mira because Mira was not being sold. Mira was being brought along the way. You bring a coat, and he had said so in the car in exactly those words and then laughed as though he had made a joke. Duarte Serra decided he needed to recover something in front of witnesses. He leaned in and said something under his breath about knowing what she was about, the kind of woman who stands against a wall and hopes, and he said it close enough that his breath moved the loose hair at her temple. Mira told him quietly and without any heat at all that his family's shipping license had been renewed under a provisional number in March because the original filing had been rejected twice, and that the provisional expired in 11 days, and that she assumed he already knew that since he was standing in this room tonight asking these particular people for favors. The color went out of his face in stages. She had not raised her voice. That was the part that unmade him. She had simply reached into a filing cabinet in her head and produced the one number in his life that could ruin him, and she had done it the way another woman might have offered him a drink. He backed off. He did it badly with a laugh that fooled nobody, and he went to stand with his uncle near the windows, and he did not look at Mara again for the rest of the night, though he would look at her plenty in the weeks after, and by then it would be too late for him. Leah grabbed her sister's hand with both of hers and held on hard. Mira did not squeeze back. She never did. She had learned young that comfort given freely was a debt somebody eventually collected. So she gave the useful thing instead. She stood in front of her sister, and she made herself into a wall, and she let the girl hold on. 11 years she had been doing this. 11 years since their mother, Constanza Cardoso, had gone into the water off the Foz breakwater on a night with no storm and no witnesses, and the police had written the word accident and closed the file in 19 days. And Vader Cardoso had come home from the funeral, poured himself a drink, and never once said his wife's name out loud again. Mira had been 20, Leah had been 11. Somebody had to keep the accounts, and somebody had to make the meals, and somebody had to sit with an 11-year-old who could not sleep unless there was a body in the room. Mira had done all three, and she had never been thanked, and she had stopped expecting to be thanked at around the second year, and that was the moment she had quietly stopped being a person and started being a function. She thought about that a great deal later. About the exact hour a woman stops being someone and becomes something that works. The room was full of people pretending this was a party. There were 5 families present, not 5 people, 5 families, meaning 5 old names, with money that had been washed so many times it had gone soft, and every one of them had come to Porto tonight for the same reason, which was that the Braganza house had swallowed 2 rivals in 18 months, and the survivors had decided the safest position was standing beside it rather than in front of it. And so each family had brought a daughter. They had dressed her and instructed her and delivered her the way you deliver a peace offering you are terrified will be refused. 5 young women stood near the windows in a loose line arranged by somebody with an eye for it, and they were extraordinary. Every one of them. Beatriz Almeida in champagne, whose smile had been rehearsed for a man who had not arrived yet. Inés Serra in emerald, cool and correct and expensive. Carlota Nunes in deep red, who was the only one of them enjoying herself. The 2 Teixeira cousins in silver and slate, so composed they barely appeared to breathe. And Leah Cardoso in pale blue, 22 years old, with her hands hidden behind her back so nobody would see them shake. Nobody in that room thought this had anything to do with love. Mira was certain of it. Love was not a currency these families traded in. Love was for people who could afford to lose things. What Mira thought about instead, standing where the light did not reach, was the arithmetic of it, because that was how her mind worked, and it had never once given her any peace. She thought 5 daughters, 5 families, and not one son in that line. She thought about how in every house on this river, the boys were assets to be developed, and the girls were assets to be liquidated. She thought about how her father had spent 19 years telling her she was the sensible one, the plain one, the useful one, and how every single one of those words had been a way of saying that she was not worth enough to sell. And the strange, ugly thing, the thing she would never say out loud to anyone, was that some small, starving part of her had always been jealous of that, of being wanted enough to be bargained over. She hated herself for it. She had hated herself for it since she was 15. Somebody rang a small bell near the doors. Emilio Rocha stepped forward. He was 71 years old, and he had been the Braganza family's counselor for 30 of those years, and he had the eyes of an accountant and the patience of an undertaker. He addressed the room without effort. He said that 5 houses had come in good faith. He said that each of the young women present came from a line older than most of the buildings on this river. He said that the head of the house would speak with them or take the evening or decide immediately, and that the decision belonged to him and to nobody else in the room. And he looked at the fathers when he said that last part, and every one of them understood the warning inside it. Mira watched the 5 young women straighten. She watched Leah's chin come up because their father had made her practice it. She watched her own father, Vitor Cardoso, adjust his tie with the hands of a man who has already spent money he does not have, and she felt something cold and final settle in her chest. Because she had made a decision 3 days earlier in the kitchen at 2 in the morning and alone with a calculator. And the decision was this: if that man chose Leah tonight, Mira would take her sister out of this city by dawn, using money she had been quietly hiding in a credit union account under her mother's maiden name since she was 23. 9,400 euros. 11 years of skimmed grocery money and unpaid overtime and small invisible thefts from a man who never checked because he had never once believed she was capable of taking anything. It was not enough. She knew it was not enough. She had decided to do it anyway. The doors opened. So, Rafael Braganza came in alone, and the room changed temperature. He was 36. He wore black and nothing else. No watch, no ring, no chain, nothing that asked to be looked at, and Mira understood immediately what that meant, because she read people the way she read a balance sheet. A man who wears nothing to be noticed and is noticed anyway is a man who has stopped needing anyone's permission for anything. He did not greet the fathers. He did not accept a drink. He walked into the middle of a room that had been arranged entirely for his benefit, and he looked at it with an expression Mira could not immediately name. And then she named it, and it disturbed her because it was not power and it was not appetite. It was exhaustion. It was the face of a man who has been handed the same gift so many times that he has stopped believing any of it is actually for him. He walked the line. He stopped in front of Beatriz Almeida for perhaps 2 seconds. Her practiced smile arrived and found nothing to land on. He moved to Inés Serra, and something flickered at her family name, and it was not warmth. Carlota Nunes met his eyes directly, which was brave, and he acknowledged it with a small motion of his head that was almost respect, and then he moved on. The Teixeira cousins he passed without stopping at all, and then he reached Leah. Mira's whole body went cold. He looked at her sister for 4 seconds. Mira counted them. She counted them the way she counted everything, because counting was the only thing that had ever kept her upright, and she thought, this is it. This is the moment I lose her. This is where 11 years of standing in front of this girl turns out to have been worth nothing at all. She had already shifted her weight forward. She was going to say something. She had no idea what. She only knew that she was not going to stand there quietly while it happened, and that this would be the first time in her adult life that she had opened her mouth without first calculating the cost, and that she did not care. Then Rafael Berganza's eyes moved past Leah, past all of them. They came off that line of beautiful waiting women, the way water comes off glass, and they traveled without hurry across the room over the crystal and the fathers and the lit city beyond the windows, and they stopped on the far wall. On her, Sawyer. Mira actually turned around. She would be embarrassed about that for years. She turned her head and looked behind her, fully certain there was a guard there, a door, a person of consequence, some rational explanation, and there was nothing behind her but wall. And when she turned back, he was still looking at her and only at her, and something in her chest pulled hard and bright and wrong, like a thread she had not known was in her, had suddenly been drawn tight. And then he started walking. The room noticed within 3 steps. The murmur came back, sharp and confused heads turning to follow the direction of his attention and finding nothing there worth the trip. Somebody laughed nervously and stopped. Vitor Cardoso half rose from his chair. Mira's heart was going so hard she could feel it behind her teeth. She told herself he was going to veer. Any second now he would turn towards some man along the wall, some piece of business, and this terrible feeling would collapse into the ordinary relief of being wrong about being seen the way she was always safely wrong about being seen. He did not veer. 10 steps, 8, 5. And his eyes were not cold anymore. Something was burning behind them, something that looked like shock and fury and disbelief, all fused into one expression, and underneath all of it, something she had no name for at all. He stopped close enough that she had to tip her head back. He did not touch her. He said one sentence to the entire room without looking away from her face. He said he had made his choice. Emilio Rocha came forward fast and said carefully that the daughters were by the window. Rafael answered without turning his head. He said he knew where they were, and the whole world tilted. Here is what Mira did next, and it was not what anyone in that room expected. Least of all the 5 families who had spent a fortune to be humiliated in front of each other. She did not blush. She did not lower her eyes. She did not go soft. She told him no. She told him in a voice that came out flatter and steadier than she had any right to expect that there had been an error, that she was not part of the arrangement, that the arrangement was for her sister, and she had come to make sure it did not happen. She told him she was not property, that she had spent 31 years being counted as furniture in her father's house, and she was not going to be counted as furniture in his, and that a man who walked into a room and pointed at a woman had not chosen anything he had shopped. The room made a sound, a collective intake, the noise 100 people make when they simultaneously realize they may be about to watch someone die. Vitor Cardoso said his daughter's name in a strangled voice from across the room. Mira did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Rafael Berganza, and she waited for the anger because she had lived with a dangerous man her entire life, and she knew the exact shape of the second before it lands. It did not come. What came instead was worse, and she was not prepared for it at all. Something in that hard face moved. Not a smile, nothing as simple as a smile. Something closer to relief, the way a man looks when a thing he has been told for 11 years was impossible turns out to be standing right in front of him, arguing. He said that she was right. He said it out loud in front of 5 families, which was a thing no man in his position had done in living memory. He said that he had no interest in being obeyed, that he had a city full of people who obeyed him, and it was the loneliest thing he had ever owned. Then he asked her, and it was a question and not an instruction, whether she remembered a hall number. Mira did not understand. He said it plainly without drama, the way a man sets down something extremely heavy. He said 41K, and Mira Cardoso stopped breathing. Because she had been 20 years old, and it had been raining hard enough to flood the low road, and she had gone down to the empty boat sheds at Foz at 1 in the morning, for the only reason she ever went anywhere in that year, which was that her mother was 3 weeks dead, and she could not stay in a house where nobody would say her name. And there had been a boy on the stones at the water's edge, and he had not been a man yet, 25 at most, and he had been bleeding from somewhere under his ribs and trying very hard to get himself into the river before anyone found him alive. She had pulled him out. She had not thought about it. She had put her arms under his and hauled, and he had been too heavy, and she had done it anyway, and he had fought her the whole way because he had already decided how the night was going to end. She had put him in the third shed, the one with the broken lock that nobody had used since the 80s. She had strapped his ribs with the sewing kit out of her mother's coat pocket because it was the only thing she had, and she had done it badly, and he had passed out twice. And then near dawn, when the boat came back down the river, running dark and slow along the far bank, looking for a body, Mira had gone to the doorway and looked at it for a long time, and she had come back and told him a number. 41K, painted on the transom second registry mark, repainted over an older one. She had not told him to be brave. She had not held his hand. She had told him whose boat it was because she had spent 2 years doing her father's port filings, and she knew every hull on that stretch of the Douro by number. And she had told him that if he lived through the next day, that number was the only thing in the world that could save him. He had looked at her like she had handed him a weapon. He had asked her name and she had not given it because a woman alone in a boat shed at 4 in the morning with a bleeding stranger does not give her name, and because some part of her had already known that if she said it out loud, it would be the first time in a year anyone had wanted to know it, and she would not have survived that. She had left him her coat. That was true, and it had happened, and for 11 years she had told herself that the coat was the whole of it, a small kindness, a thing she gave away in the rain. It had never been the coat, it had been the number. She had not saved him with her pity. She had saved him with her arithmetic, with the one thing about herself. Her father had spent 19 years calling useless, and she had walked away and gone home and washed the blood out of her sleeves in the sink and never told a living soul, not even Leah, and she had made herself forget his face on purpose because she had been 20 and terrified, and the alternative was lying awake wondering whether he had lived. And now she was standing 40 floors above the river, and the man in front of her was 36 years old and ran the city, and his eyes were the same eyes that had looked up at her off the wet stones of a boat shed while she stitched him with her dead mother's thread. Mira heard her own voice come out of her, and it did not sound like her voice at all. She asked him how long he had been looking. Rafael Braganza did not answer that immediately. He looked at her for a long moment at her 31-year-old face, and her 3-season-old dress, and her hands that had gone completely still. And when he finally spoke, the entire room heard it, and not one person in it would ever forget it. He said 11 years. 11 years, and the room did not know what to do with it. Somebody's glass went down onto a table too hard. Vitor Cardozo made a small, strangled sound that he tried to turn into a cough. And Mira, who had been standing in that spot for 2 hours with her hands folded and her eyes down, understood that she had just become the most dangerous piece of information in the city and that she had not agreed to any of it. She told him she needed to leave. Raphael did not argue. That was the thing that would keep her awake later. He stepped back and he gave her room, and he said that a car would take her and her sister anywhere she wanted to go, including away from him, and that if she chose a way, no one would follow. She asked him whether Leah was free to go. He said yes. She asked whether Leah was free to go tonight permanently, and whether her father's arrangement was void, and whether anyone in this room would ever be permitted to come near a 22-year-old girl again on the strength of a debt she had not signed for. Raphael turned to the room and answered that one out loud, and the answer took 19 seconds and rearranged the balance of power on that river for the next decade. He said the Cardoso arrangement was dead. He said the daughters of all 5 houses were under his protection tonight and every night after, and that no man in this city would call in a favor for having attended because they had come in good faith and they would leave with his respect. He said the alliances he had offered still stood. He said he simply would not be marrying any of them. It was Mira realized later, an extraordinary piece of surgery. He had insulted 5 powerful families to their faces and in the same breath made it impossible for any of them to take offense without looking like fools. He had turned a catastrophe into a gift they would have to smile and accept. He had done it in a flat voice without hurrying for her, and she was not sure he knew he had done it. Then he said one more thing, and it landed harder than everything before it. He said the debt Vitor Cardoso owed was not forgiven. He said it was frozen. He said forgiveness would leave the man free and frozen meant leashed, and that the leash would be held by his office and reviewed annually and never released. Mira watched her father's face come apart in real time. She had waited 19 years to see it, and she felt nothing she had expected to feel. No triumph, just a low-grade tiredness, the way you feel when a fever finally breaks and you realize how much of you it ate. She took her sister's hand and she walked out. Leah cried in the car for 11 minutes and then stopped and asked the question Mira had been dreading. She asked what a hull number was. Mira said it was nothing. Leah said that a man who ran half the shipping on the Douro had crossed a room full of women in front of 5 families and said a number out loud, and that her sister had gone the color of paper, and that she was 22 and not stupid, and she would like to be told the truth for once in her life instead of being protected into a corner. That landed harder than Mira expected. She told her a version. She told her that 11 years ago she had helped somebody in trouble down at the sheds, and she had never known his name. Leah asked why she had never mentioned it. Mira said that she had not thought it mattered. That was the lie, and she knew it was the lie while she was saying it, and the truth was uglier, and she was not ready to look at it. The truth was that Mira Cardoso had spent 11 years believing that the single most decent thing she had ever done was worth nothing, because she had done it and nothing she did was worth anything, and to have kept the memory would have meant admitting that she wanted it to count. He did not chase her. That was the strategy, and it worked, and she resented it for exactly 9 days. What arrived instead were documents. The first came by courier on the second morning, and it was a copy of the freeze order on her father's debt, unredacted, with every figure visible. Nobody had ever shown Mira a document about her own family without her having to steal it first. The second came on day 4. It was Leah's university enrollment file, already paid, already processed, with a note attached in hard, careful handwriting, saying that it had been paid from a fund the family maintained for exactly this, that it was not a gift to Mira, that it was not leverage, and that if she preferred, she could reimburse it in installments, and he would accept them. She reimbursed the first installment that afternoon out of the credit union account, €200, and she sent it with no note. The third document arrived on day 9, and it was not a document at all. It was an appointment. Emilio Rocha, the counselor, requested an hour of her time in a public place at whatever hour suited her. She chose a cafe in Ribera with bad coffee and a good window because she wanted witnesses, and she got there 40 minutes early and sat where she could see the door. Rocha arrived alone, which surprised her, and he sat down and did not pretend to be charming. He told her she had ruined a very expensive evening. She told him that she had noticed. He told her he had worked for the Braganza family for 30 years and had served 2 men in that chair, and that he had watched the first one bury his own son's ambition and very nearly the son himself, and that he had never in 3 decades seen Rafael Braganza do a single thing that was not calculated 3 moves ahead. Then he said that what happened in that room was not calculated and that this frightened him more than anything Duarte Serra had ever done. Mira asked him what he actually wanted. Rocha said he wanted to know what she was. She said she was a bookkeeper. He said that a bookkeeper does not walk up to a Serra in a room full of armed men and recite his license expiry back to him. Mira put her coffee down, and she told the old man the truth because she was tired and because he had not once tried to flatter her. She said that she had done every filing, every customs declaration, every tonnage certificate, import fee for the Cardoso company since she was 18 years old, unpaid, under her father's signature, and that if he pulled the last 13 years of Cardoso paperwork, he would find her handwriting on all of it and her name on none of it. Emilio Rocha was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made the back of her neck go cold. He said that he had already pulled it all 13 years. 2 days ago, she asked why. He said because he was 71 and paid to be suspicious. And because when a man like Raphael crosses a room, the first thing a counselor does is find out what walked into it. He said that he had expected to find a woman positioning herself. He said that what he had found was 13 years of flawless port compliance filed by a woman who had never once been listed as an employee, and that in his professional opinion, it was the most sustained piece of unpaid labor he had encountered in a career built on watching men take credit. Then he said the sentence that broke something loose in her chest. He said somebody should have paid you. Mira Cardoso, who had not cried at her mother's funeral, sat in a cafe with bad coffee, and had to look out the window for 11 seconds before she could speak. She agreed to see Raphael on one condition, and she said it herself. She would not come to the Braganza building. She would not be a woman collected by a car and delivered upstairs. She named a place instead, a working office above a chandlery near the docks, and she named a time, and she arrived first. He came alone. No driver waiting outside. She checked. She had prepared 3 sentences, and she used none of them. What she said was that she wanted to see his books. Raphael asked which books. She said all of them. She said that she had spent her whole life around men who called her sensible while they hid things from her, and that she was not going to sit across from him and be told beautiful things about 11 years ago, while the actual arithmetic of his life stayed locked in a room she was not allowed into. She said that if he wanted to know her, this was the only door, because numbers were the only place she was fully honest and the only place she could tell whether anyone else was. He said yes. She had not expected yes. She had prepared for a negotiation, and instead she got a yes in under 4 seconds, and she found that she was angry about it, and it took her most of the following week to understand why. It was because she had wanted him to refuse. A refusal would have been familiar. A refusal she could have survived. So she read for 9 days. And in 9 days, she learned more about the man than his own captains knew, and most of it did not flatter him. She found the legitimate side first, which was larger than the city believed. Freight cold storage, 2 container terminals, a cannery. She found the gray side after that, the trucking that moved things. Nobody itemized the 3 restaurants that laundered like breathing. She found protection income listed under a euphemism so thin it was almost honest. And then she found the 8-year pattern, and she sat back in her chair. Because there was a line running through those books, and the line was this: every single year since he had taken the chair, illegitimate income had dropped, and the legitimate income had risen, and it had cost him money to do that. Not a little money, millions over 8 years. He had been dismantling his own father's empire from the inside slowly at enormous expense. And he had never announced it, and none of his rivals had noticed, because nobody looks for a man getting deliberately smaller. She asked him about it directly. He said that his father had built the house on 9 dead men, and he had spent 8 years trying to build something out of the ruin that was not rotten all the way through, and that he could not do that standing on top of a grave he was pretending was not there. Mira asked him what 9 dead men, and the room changed. He said the boat, 4-1K. He said that the haul she had recited to him at 4 in the morning in a boat shed when she was 20 had not been sent to find him. It had already done its work that week. He said that boat had put 9 crewmen into the water off the shelf 11 years ago, and that the loss had been filed as engine failure in heavy weather, and that there had been no heavy weather, and that the insurance had paid, and that his father had signed off on it, and that the man who had actually given the order had been paid in territory. Mira asked who gave the order. Raphael said that he had spent 11 years trying to prove it and had never been able to. He said the only proof that had ever existed had been assembled by a woman who worked the Cardoso port filings, because she was the only person on that river with access to both the manifests and the insurance declarations, and she had made copies, and she had been 3 weeks from taking them to someone in Lisbon. He said her name was Constanza Cardoso. Mira did not move. She did not move for a very long time. Then she asked him, in a voice that came out almost normal, whether he had known who she was that night in the shed. He said no. He said he had learned it 8 months later, and by then she was gone from every record he could reach, because she had never been listed as an employee anywhere in her own life. He said he had been looking for a woman who did not officially exist. She went home and she did not sleep, and at 3 in the morning, she went into the bottom of her closet and took out a cardboard box of port tax files from the year her mother died. She had been carrying that box through 4 apartments for 11 years. She had told herself it was sentiment. It was not sentiment. Because at 20 years old, 3 weeks after they pulled her mother out of the water, Mira Cardoso had found a second set of ledgers in her mother's handwriting inside a folder marked Provisional Customs, and she had not understood a single line of it. And she had understood exactly one thing about it, which was that it was the reason her mother was dead. She had not burned it. She had not hidden it under a floorboard either, because a girl who grew up in that house knew that floorboards get searched. She had done the only clever thing available to a terrified 20-year-old. She had filed it. She had put her mother's murder inside a stack of legal port tax documents where it looked like paperwork in plain sight in a box her father would never open because opening it would have meant doing work. And then for 11 years, in the hours when she could not sleep, which was most of them, Mira had been quietly teaching herself to read it, line by line, account by account, cross-referencing tonnage against declared cargo against insurance, payout learning, the shipping law she needed as she went because there was no one to ask and because she was the only person left who cared. It had taken her 11 years. She had finished it 14 months ago. She had a complete source cross-reference case sitting in a cardboard box in her closet, and she had never shown it to anyone. And the reason was so simple and so humiliating that she had never once said it aloud. She had not believed anyone would take it from her hands and treat it as real. Duarte Serra came for her 4 days later, and he did it in daylight outside the credit union, which meant somebody had told him where she banked. He did not touch her. He had learned that much. He told her that his uncle wanted to make her an offer. He told her that the Braganza name would not survive what was coming, that 8 years of a man playing at being clean had made him soft and had made the families restless, and that there was a chair coming open. Mira asked what the offer was. He said her mother's ledgers. She said she did not have them. He smiled, and it was the first genuinely frightening thing he had ever done. And he said that his uncle had spent 4 years and a great deal of money chasing the rumor of those pages, and that everyone had always assumed Constanza Cardoso hid them somewhere clever. Then he said that it had taken them until 3 weeks ago to consider the possibility that she had not hidden them at all, that she had simply died and left them lying around in her own house, and that the only person who ever went through that dead woman's papers was the daughter nobody looked at. He said that his uncle's offer was 140,000 euros, a flight, and a new name. He said that Mara was good at disappearing, that she had been doing it her whole life, and that this time somebody was finally willing to pay her for it. And then he leaned in close enough that she could smell his cologne and said that if she preferred they could do it the other way, and that the other way had worked very well on her mother. He came back 9 days later, and he came the way she would have designed it if anyone had ever asked her what she wanted, which nobody ever had. He did not send a car. He did not send flowers or documents or a man with an envelope. He climbed the stairs above the chandlery himself in the middle of a working Tuesday, and he waited in the corridor because she had a client in the office, and the client was a 70-year-old man with 2 boats and a tonnage problem, and Rafael Braganza stood outside a door for 40 minutes and did not knock once. When Mira finally opened it, he asked whether she had time. She said she had 20 minutes. He said 20 minutes was more than he had expected. And then he did the strangest thing he had ever done, which was to put a folder on her desk and ask her to bill him for reading it. She looked at him. He said he was serious. He said he was a client. He said the Braganza companies had a compliance problem, going back 8 years, that no one internally had ever been willing to name out loud, and that he had come to the best port compliance auditor on that river, and that if she said no, he would leave and not come back, and if she said yes, he expected an invoice at her standard rate. Mira asked him if he understood what he was doing. He said yes. She said he was handing over the entire financial spine of his organization to a woman who had walked out on him. He said that was correct. And then he said the sentence that she would think about for the rest of her life, and it was not a romantic sentence at all, which was exactly why it worked. He said that he had spent 3 months going back over every decision he had made about her, and that he had found 11 of them, and that in every single one, he had been solving a problem that belonged to her without asking her whether she wanted it solved. He said he had counted them because she had once told him that counting was the only place she was fully honest, and that he had wanted to be honest in the language she trusted. 11 decisions. He said the worst of it was not the docket. The worst of it was that he had genuinely believed, right up until she said it out loud, that loving someone gave him a form of jurisdiction. He said he had learned it from his father, who had loved nothing, and he had assumed that because his own version came with warmth attached, it was a different thing entirely. He said it was not a different thing. He said it was the same architecture with better lighting. Mira read the folder. She read it for 3 weeks, and she billed him for every hour. And when the first invoice went out, her hands did not shake, because by then she had issued 400 of them. And what she found in those books was worse than she had expected, and it had nothing to do with crime. She found that Rafael Braganza had been personally absorbing losses for 8 years. Terminal by terminal, contract by contract, He had been paying out of the legitimate side to cover the shortfall from what he had shut down so that the men who worked for him would not feel it and would not turn. He had been buying loyalty with his own money for 8 years and calling it a transition. She told him it was not a transition, it was a subsidy and subsidies end. She told him that in 11 months the cash position collapsed and that when it collapsed, 400 people found out at once that the clean version of the company could not pay them and that the entire thing he had spent 8 years building would go back to the river in a single quarter. He asked her how long she had known. She said 19 days. He asked her why she had not said it immediately. And Mira said because she had promised herself she would never again decide what a person was ready to hear. She said she had waited until she had a solution so that she could put both things on the table at the same time and let him choose. Then she opened the second file. The restructure took 4 months and it nearly ended him. She made him sell the cannery. She made him break the trucking division into two entities and let the smaller one go entirely, and it employed 41 people. And she found every one of them a place before the paperwork went through because she had done that math too. She made him convert the protection income into a genuine security contract with genuine invoices and genuine tax, which cost him a third of it and made the other two-thirds untouchable. And she made him give up the terminal fee concession he had traded away 11 months earlier to keep her name off a docket. That was the one he fought her on. He said those three families would move against him. She said they would not because she had already gone to see them. He asked her what she had said. And Mira told him that she had walked into the Nunez house alone with no protection and no arrangement and had put a 5-year fee schedule on the table and had told them plainly that she was the person who had read the books and that the current terms would bankrupt Braganza inside a year and take their volume down with it, and that she was not asking for a favor, she was showing them arithmetic. She said Carlota Nunez had signed in 11 minutes. Raphael sat back and looked at her, and there was something in his face that she had seen exactly twice before, once across a penthouse and once across a settlement council table. He said that she had gone into a rival house alone. She said yes. He said that 11 months ago, the thought of that would have made him do something stupid. She said she knew, and that was why she had told him afterward. And he laughed. It was not a big laugh, and it was mostly at himself, and Mira realized standing there that she had never once made a man laugh at himself in her entire life, and that she liked it more than almost anything. Leah graduated that spring. She had done the degree in 3 years instead of 4 because she had inherited exactly the same brain as her sister and had spent her childhood being told she was decorative. She stood up at the end of her final project presentation and thanked one person by name, and the name was not their father's. Afterward, outside, she told Mira something that took the ground out from under her. She said she had known about the boat shed. She said she had been 11 years old and she had woken up alone in the apartment at 2 in the morning and had gone looking and had gotten as far as the top of the steps down to the sheds and had seen her sister carrying a man who was bleeding. She said she had gone home and got back into bed and never said a word about it for 11 years. Mira asked why. And Leah said because she had understood even at 11 that whatever her sister was doing, she was doing it so that no one else had to know it had happened, and that if Leah said anything, Mira would stop doing things. She said she had spent 11 years being the reason her sister could not put anything down. Then she said that she was 23 now and that she was taking over the accounts for the chandlery office and that Mira was going to let her and that this was not a request. Mira let her. It took her 4 months to stop checking Leah's work at night after she had gone home, and she never told anyone that she had done it, and eventually she stopped. And the day she stopped, she sat in an empty office and could not identify the feeling for almost an hour. It was rest. She was 32 years old, and it was the first time she had ever felt it. Ottavio Serra was convicted in the second week of November. 9 counts. The inquest verdict came down first, and it used the word unlawful. And Mira read the ruling in the office above the chandlery at 8 in the morning with a cup of coffee going cold, and she did not react at all for about 6 minutes. Then she got up and drove to Matosinhos and sat in a 70-year-old woman's kitchen and read it to her out loud because the woman's eyes were bad and because 11 years earlier, a boy in a boat shed had taught her something without meaning to, which was that the difference between a rumor and a record is whether somebody says it in a room where it counts. The reopened file on Constanza Cardoso was closed in December. The finding was homicide. Mira had it framed, not the finding, the cover page with her mother's full name printed across the top and the case number underneath. And she hung it in the office where clients could see it, and when they asked, she told them. She told them every single time. For 11 years, her mother had been a woman who fell in the water, and Mira had learned young that the world will let a woman be a rumor forever if nobody is willing to be inconvenient about it. She had decided to be inconvenient for the rest of her life. He asked her in the boat shed. She had bought it that autumn, the third one at Foz, with the broken lock, and she had bought it with her own money because the man who owned it had been trying to unload it for 6 years, and she had negotiated him down herself, and she had put it on the office letterhead as the registered address because she had wanted the place where she had once hidden a bleeding stranger to be an address people wrote letters to. Raphael did not kneel, and he did not produce a speech. He said that he was not going to choose her. He said that he had chosen her once in front of 5 families, and it had been the single most arrogant thing he had ever done, and that he had spent 2 years understanding why, and that the reason was that a man who chooses is a man who has decided that the other person is a thing that can be selected. He said he had crossed a room to a woman he did not know and had believed that this made him different from every man in that room. He said it had not. Then he said that he was 38 years old and that he had been alone since he was 25 and half dead on the stones outside that door, and that he was asking, and that the answer was entirely hers, and that if it was no, he would still be her client on Monday because the compliance work was the compliance work. Mira asked him what he thought marriage would be. He said an audit that never closes, and she said yes. They married in a garden with 11 people. Leah, Emilio Rocha, who cried and denied it, the old woman from Matosinhos, who had insisted, and 4 of the other families of the 9, who had also insisted, and who Mira had not had the heart or the wish to refuse. She wore gray on purpose. Nobody there knew why, except one person, and when Raphael saw her, the entire hard architecture of his face came apart in a way that made Leah put her hand over her mouth. Her father was not there. He had not been invited. She had thought about it for a long time and had decided in the end that the absence of cruelty was not the same as the presence of a father, and that she had spent 19 years auditing his ledger, and it did not balance and it was not going to, and she had closed the account. She did not hate him. That was the part that surprised her. She had simply finally stopped filing. 2 years on the office above the chandlery had 6 employees in a waiting list in a second location in Les Choins. Mira Cardoso held the financial control of the Braganza companies by notarized instrument, not as a wife and not as a gift, but as an appointed officer with a contract, a salary, a title on the door, and her name in the corporate register. And she had negotiated the terms herself and had asked for 11% more than the outgoing man had been paid, and had gotten it and had gone home afterward and sat on the stairs and laughed until she cried. Every year in March, the port office in Les Choins now published the crew list of every registered departure. That had been her condition on a licensing consultation she did for the authority, and she had refused 3 times to sign off until they agreed to it. 9 men had gone into the water, and nobody had known their names. Now, every man who left that harbor had his name printed somewhere a widow could find it. That was the thing she was proudest of, and she never told anybody because it sounded small and because she had learned that the things that actually change the world always do. There was a morning near the end of that second year. She woke early the way she always did, and she lay still for a while, and she caught herself doing the old thing, the bracing, the automatic search for what was about to be taken. Raphael said, without opening his eyes, that he could hear her thinking. She said he could not hear thinking. He said he could hear hers, that she went very quiet and very still, and that he had learned it in the first month and had never stopped listening for it. And Mira told him what she was thinking. She said that for 31 years, she had been certain of exactly one thing about herself, which was that she was the kind of person life happened to and never for. She had believed she was the one who stood against the wall and held the coats and kept the accounts and watched other people get chosen, and that if she was good enough and useful enough and asked for nothing at all, she might be allowed to keep a small, safe corner of the world. She said she had built her entire self out of that brick by brick, and it had made sense of everything. She said a man had crossed a room and knocked the first brick out, And then she said the thing that mattered, the thing that was the whole of it, and she said it looking at the ceiling and not at him. She said that he had not saved her. She said he had crossed a room, and that was all he had ever done, and that everything after it she had done with her own two hands at a kitchen table at 4 in the morning for 11 years alone. She said that the girl in the boat shed had not saved him with kindness either. She had saved him with a number, with the one thing about herself that every man in her life had called worthless. She said that they had both been rescued by the same thing, which was a woman who counted. Rafael was quiet for a long time. Then he said that he had spent 11 years believing he owed her his life and that she had just taken that away from him. She said good because a debt is a leash, and she had watched what leashes do to people. She said she did not want to be owed. She said she wanted to be worked with. Sometimes she still thought about the 20-year-old on the wet stones with a stranger's blood on her sleeves 3 weeks after her mother went into the water, absolutely certain that nobody was coming and nobody would ever come. That girl had believed her kindness would vanish into the rain and change nothing. That girl had been so sure her life would only ever be a list of things given away and never returned, and she had given anyway. And she had walked home and washed her sleeves in the sink and told no one because she had already decided she was not the kind of person things happen for. Mira wished she could go back and tell her one thing, not the penthouse, not the council table, not the man. Just this, someone is going to see you. But that is not the part that saves you. The part that saves you is that you were already the only person on this river who could read the pages, and you were already the only one who kept them. And 11 years from tonight, you will stand up in a room full of men who own the water, and you will read 9 names into the record in your own voice under your own name, and not one person alive will be able to take it off you. Keep the pages. Learn to read them. Somebody is coming, but you will already have gotten there first.